Hello, my name is Melissa Connors, and this is my research project. It's called The King and His Demons, Charles VI's Obsession with the Occult That Led to the Great Burning. Before we begin, this presentation contains mature subjects of the occult and the black arts, including torture devices, descriptions of thus and the devil. Ye be warned. James's mother was none other than Mary, Queen of Scots, and his father, like his mother, were both descendants of Henry VIII. Quite an impressive and terrifying family tree. His father was involved in a conspiracy to murder his mother's secretary, so their marriage was, to say, a little bit complicated. A short time after his father was murdered, some suspected Mary to be involved. As a baby, James's young life continued to face tribulation. His mother was captured and thrown into Lochleven Castle, but would later escape only after she signed her abdication of the throne in 1567. She would spend 19 years in various prisons until she was found guilty of plotting to assassinate Elizabeth I and put to death in 1587 by beheading. James, despite all of this, would become the successor of the last Tudor monarch and would reign in Scotland for 36 years as James VI and become the first ruler of England as James I. James VI, to say, is an incredibly interesting monarch. The sixth king, James of Scotland, and the first of England, he was known to enjoy men both sexually and romantically, but knew his kingly duties required him to marry and produce an heir. James married Anne of Denmark when she was just 14 years old, and he was 23 when they got engaged. James also married the Danish princess to put an end to the rumors that he was a secret Catholic. He would go on to have 7 children, and one of his children would become Charles I, the first English monarch to be beheaded. James decided to travel to Denmark to pick up his young bride, and his journey across the sea would launch his obsession with the occult. More to come later on that matter. The hysteria of the witch hunts of Scotland started somewhere. Religion could be to blame with the move to Protestantism from Catholicism. Women who were healers or midwives, or even just widows living now without a husband, were ripe to be accused of witchcraft. Rural witchcraft would sweep from village to village, with neighbors accusing each other of witchcraft. If one's crops had a bad season, or if your cow fell ill and died, you could blame your grumpy old woman neighbor of bewitching your cow. In the book Witchcraft in Early Scotland, edited by Normand and Roberts, they cite that the social and economic pressures are most likely to explain accusations. Political, religious, and ideological pressures are more likely to explain prosecutions by ruling class agents in urban Edinburgh. No one was safe as witches transcended social class and order. James's masterpiece of the occult is entitled Demonology, and was inspired by his readings of all things black art, such as Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft, Johann Weyr's De Prestigiis Daemonum, and Jean Baudin's De la Démonomanie des sorcières. Forgive me. James's book is a humble 81 pages and nothing truly out of the ordinary or outstanding in the world of occult books and witchcraft at the time, like Reginald Scott's near 500 pages. However, James was the King of England and Scotland and God's ruler of Great Britain. Of course, like a good Christian king, James looked towards the scriptures for divine authority arguments. Example and proof, and further stressed the English people's lives must be solely reliant on the Christian God in the face of the evils of witchcraft. The most unique characteristic of James's demonology is that it is the only demonology written by a, quote, Renaissance monarch. The News from Scotland is a witchcraft pamphlet that contains the accounts of 3 women who were accused of witchcraft and one who used her witchcraft to attempt to murder the king. The pamphlet plays a huge role in relaying the information and records of the Scottish witch hunt that we have today, and also aided in the spread of the hysteria during its time. The women named in this pamphlet were interrogated by King James himself. James also insisted that the accounts be printed and published so that his crusade against witchcraft might continue. Two of the women named in the news from Scotland are Gailis Duncan and Agnes Sampson. Duncan would sneak out of her master's house at night to heal the sick and was soon caught by her master and accused of witchcraft. Her master tortured her and searched her body for the devil's mark, or privy mark, which is the spot where a witch had physical contact with the devil, which he obviously found, being that these marks were always moles, freckles, or birthmarks. Duncan was then accused of witchcraft and put in jail, where she would eventually name over 70 persons and accuse them of witchcraft, including Dr. Fian and Agnes Sampson. In 1816, a limited edition reprint of the News of Scotland was created, and now it exists in digital form for your own personal enjoyment in its almost original form. Dr. John Fian, pictured here leading a group of witches as they dance around the kirk, was a Scottish schoolmaster from East Lothian. He was accused of trying to bewitch a woman whom he had affection for. His spell was foiled by the woman's mother, who was also accused of being a witch, and as a result, he bewitched a cow instead. You can't make this stuff up. He confessed to making a pact with the devil and confessed to acting as scholar and register for the witches of North Berwick Kirk. Dr. Fian was found guilty and burned at the stake. Kirks were churches and sometimes the scenes of witches communing with the devil, or places where covens met. St. Andrew's Kirk was a church where witches were suspected of convening and holding their meetings with the devil. St. Andrew's Kirk is situated on the coast, which, of course, is a perfect place to conjure a storm, like the one that almost killed the king. The foundation of the kirk still remains today. Agnes Sampson lived in East Lothian, Scotland, and was a respectable mother and widow of her community, working as a midwife and was thought to have healing powers. This makes sense as she helped deliver infants and take care of their mothers, but alas, she would go down in history as a notorious witch. We know of Agnes because of her name mentioned quite a bit in the News from Scotland and trial records. An account recorded by James Melville of Hal Hill states that she received a gift of an image of James VI from the devil and was met by a black man to collect the gift. It was said that Agnes could have made the image in cahoots with the devil to cause his death. In the fall of 1590, she was arrested and questioned and considered to be part of the women or witches who were already accused of conjuring the storm that almost killed King James on his voyage to collect his bride in Denmark. This account tells that she was accused of sinking a dead cat into the sea with her witchy companions, who attached parts of dead men's bodies to the cat into the sea near Leith. But this also clearly caused the storm that threatened to kill James in his voyage returning from Denmark. Agnes also is recorded in the News from Scotland describing a Sabbath where there were 200 witches in attendance, where the devil spoke out against King James. She confessed after being tortured, and her body was stripped to reveal a privy mark. Agnes is also quite famous as a convicted witch because James interrogated her, as he was skeptical of her story. Agnes then apparently told James things about the conversation that he himself had with his wife, Anne of Denmark, on their wedding night. After this questioning, James was convinced of her confession and guilt, and on January 27th, 1591, she was accused of 51 points of witchcraft. She was taken to the scaffold at Castle Hill on the 28th of January and garroted and burnt at the stake. While the role of women, for the most part, remained traditional in Scotland, economic and social changes were afoot that set the stage for the witch hunt. Women mostly fell victim to the torture and executions of the witch hunts and trials, and their roles as healers, midwives, or widows put them in the spotlight for accusations. Normand and Roberts comment that, in Scotland at least, peasant magical practitioners and influential and wealthy people had many different dealings with each other. If politics be the motivator, then the accuser had free rein, and even the Earl of Bothwell could not escape it. Peasants crossed social lines and were face to face with the social elite. Let's talk about torture, shall we? Torture was the tried and true way to bleed a confession, literally, out of those who were accused. Torture during the Scottish witch hunts included the breast ripper, which consisted of 4 pronged levers that would attach to a person's breast and proceed to rip it from said person's chest. An accused witch would also be stripped naked and examined head to foot, looking for any sign of a birthmark or mole as a sign of the devil. Redheads were also suspected of communing with the devil. Tough break. Executions were mainly dealt in the accused being burnt at the stake. Although it is not commonly recorded, a number of the accused died of their torture and imprisonment. Another particularly gruesome form of torture involved the Scots bridle, which is also depicted on the previous slide. The bridle would be used on a woman who would first have their head and body shaved of hair, and then she would be fastened to the wall of her cell by her bridle. The bridle consisted of 4 sharp prongs. 2 prongs would press against the tongue and the other 2 against the cheeks. It is said that husbands were known to use this device on their nagging wives, and of course, they were used on witches. The next image is of thumb screws, or pillywinks, as they were commonly called, were metal and wooden devices that were placed over the accused's thumbs and then tightened until the thumbs were crushed. The final image here depicts the false witch pricking bodkins. These devices, again, were very simple and were sharp pins that were used to prick the skin through the privy mark or birthmark found on the accused. It was assumed that they should not feel any pain if they were a witch. North Berwick is a focal point of the Scottish witch trials. Its coastline created a perfect setting for alleged witches to take up their craft and commune with the devil. From dancing around St. Andrew's Kirk to quick access to the sea, where a witch was thought to take to the waves in a sieve. The water was the witch's to command, even to conjure storms, as we have heard. James's obsession with witchcraft was so influential that the famous bard even put James's witches in a wee little play. That play was Macbeth. In the opening scene of the play, the 3 witches of Macbeth chant, "But in a sieve, I'll thither sail, and like a rat without a tail, I'll sow, I'll do," which alludes to King James's trip across the sea to collect his new bride from Denmark. It is believed that one of the witches had traveled in a sieve, yes, a sieve, that colander-type kitchen device we use for straining pasta, into the sea to stir up a maelstrom that would overcome the king and send him to his watery grave. James believed that this was the work of the North Berwick witches, as the witch would then not only be convicted of being a witch and deemed a criminal, but also convicted of regicide. Shakespeare's witches of Macbeth still stand as icons of the Black arts and have influenced countless pieces of film, art, and literature today. The aftermath of the insane witch hunt of Scotland in the 16th and 17th century led to the executions of approximately 4,000 people, 85% of which were female. This is about 4 to 5 times the amount of the executions that occurred in the mainland of Europe. The interactive tool made by the University of Edinburgh tells the stories of 3,141 men and women accused of practicing witchcraft. It is linked here. James VI was so obsessed with witchcraft and the Black arts that he convinced Parliament to pass the Witchcraft Statute of 1604, which condemns the accused as a criminal and sentences the accused to death, as so many had already been executed. Now, it was official by the hand of the king. Anxiety then was heightened across the British Isles, and Matthew Hopkins emerges and comes to the forefront. Hopkins was had a puritanical upbringing and finds himself an impoverished lawyer when he suddenly discovers a new lease on life. He believes his new calling is to destroy anything having to do with the devil. Hopkins deemed himself the Witchfinder General and entices villagers and townsfolk to hire him to hunt down their known and unknown witches for pay. Hopkins and his two assistants were judge, jury, and executioner as they hunted down the alleged witches, questioned and tortured them, and would even call for the authorities to have them executed. Today, the witches who were executed in the Scottish witch hunts still weighs heavily on those who wish to immortalize them. On International Women's Day, the group Witches of Scotland launched a campaign asking the Scottish Parliament to pardon and memorialize the accused and executed witches. Finally, just last year, on March 8th, a pardon and apology was officially made, clearing all of the accused and executed of their alleged crimes. Here are my works cited pages. And also a list of my references for this project. Just want to say thank you so much for lending me your ears and learning a little bit more about King James and his demons.